little spots.
Yeah.
How about you?
I'm Tim Green. I work at Harvard.
We'll get started in about 30 seconds or so.
Okay.
Good to see you.
You're not associated with groups. It's all.
Is that cold water? It is.
Would you like some? Yeah, I know it's hot out there.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bob Friedler. I'm with the Reserve Officers Association. Welcome to the headquarters of the Reserve Officers Association. We're about a 90-year-old organization that represents reserve components of the United States military and the uniformed civilian services, like the Public Health Service. I'm also the Director of Army Affairs and Strategic Defense Education. And it's wearing that hat that's really my privilege many, many times throughout the year, usually about 80 or 90 times, to introduce a program like this where we have an amazing speaker and, frankly, an amazing person introducing our speaker, General Vaught. Today's program, I was going to say is on the screen here, but I guess it's on the screen in the back. Features Dr. Mark and women's and veterans health issues. But it's my privilege to introduce, well, let me just talk for one more second about our defense education program. We do, as I say, about 80 or 90 programs a year, and you're welcome to virtually all of them. We have about 2 programs a year that for one reason or another are not open to the public. And we're doing one in about 2 weeks to the students from National Defense University. We'll have about 200 young officers upstairs and their faculty. And that's one of the few closed programs we'll be doing all year. But virtually everything else is open to you. We welcome you. Information about the programs is on our website, www.roa.org. And really we look forward to seeing all of you in the future. We do a lot of programs related to medicine, and usually 1 or 2 programs a year that relate to women in the military. It's now my privilege to introduce the person who will introduce our speaker today, and that's General Vaught. I met General Vaught a few minutes ago, and I told her I was just amazed at her biography. I mean, she's a lady who came up during hard times in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in the military, rose to Brigadier General. Having noticed in your biography, Ben, that you deployed to the bomber unit. You were the first person from the controller field to become a general officer, and just one of the most decorated women in American military history. It's my privilege to introduce General Vaught. Ben.
Well, thank you very much. You know, it's a real honor and privilege for me to be able to introduce our speaker, Saralyn Mark. I say that because she is what I intended to be. When I went to college, it was my intent to become a doctor. And obviously, one of us got through chemistry. And I looked at all of the places she's worked, all of the things she's done. She got her medical degree from New York University School of Medicine, which is a well-known place for going down. I was going to go to the University of Illinois, which was really a superior place in my judgment, but there's a little prejudice there. So anyway, she was the first senior medical advisor to the Office for Women's Health at Health Education and Services. She has been a medical advisor at NASA. There just isn't any end to the things that she has done and the places she's worked. And I've had an opportunity to look through her book, which is called, this particular book is called Stellar Medicine, A Journey Through the Universe of Women's Health, the subject of which I happen to be very interested in. And as I looked through that book, I was impressed with a couple of 3 things. First of all, she addresses issues that the average person like me is interested in. And as I looked at these, you know, at the age I am, let me tell you, the constant worry in my life every day is on memory loss. She talks about memory loss. And she talks about PTSD. Now, thankfully, I went to Vietnam, and I never suffered from PTSD. But I think that's one of greatest concerns we have going into the next 20 to 40 years, is PTSD of those people who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's something that we all ought to be concerned about. And we need to be concerned about it just not because of Iraq and Afghanistan, because people can suffer from PTSD from other things. Just recently we had the airplane crash in San Francisco, and one of the things they're talking about with people on that plane is PTSD. That never would have entered our minds 5 years or 10 years ago, that those people might suffer from PTSD. But they may. And then she talks about chocolate. Because my blood pressure was higher than it should be, I read something that said I should eat chocolate. So I've been religiously every night. So I was really thrilled when I saw that she addressed chocolate. And then, like so many people have, she had a tragedy in her life because her mother had cancer. And she deals with that subject too. And there's hardly a family that isn't affected in some way by cancer. So when you think about all of the things that she's done, where she's worked, she helped establish the National Centers of Leadership in Academic Medicine, the National Centers of Excellence in Women's Health, and health centers around the country. She's done educational campaigns. She is a civilian representative to the Surgeon General Physician Advisory Committee. For anybody who's in the military, that should be of interest to them. The United Nations Global Commission on Women's Health. She has covered the waterfront. But when you read her words in this book, she reaches down to you like a medical treatise or Gray's Anatomy or something like that. They're written in words and language that you and I can understand. And I think that's of singular importance, more than anything else. Because I can tell you, I will read this book. I'm not saying I will read every word, because some of the things she talks about, I'm not really interested in. But let me tell you, there's an awful lot in here that I am interested in, and every one of you who hears my voice ought to be interested in these things. Because what is she writing about? She's writing about you and me and our health. And she takes it to a bigger step, in that we ought to be thinking about what we as a nation ought to be thinking about from a health point of view. So, the other thing that impressed me is I read where she had traveled. She's been to some of the places that I was at, Vietnam, some other places, people in the military have been. And they're going to relate to this. So it's a wonderful book, and she is to be congratulated for putting fingers to whatever, whether it was her iPad or what, and putting this book together. So, Saralyn.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I am absolutely delighted to be back over at the Reserve Officers Association. I have to congratulate all of you for crossing the streets on this very warm, toasty day, and I hope that this next hour will help cool you down, but hopefully also enlighten you to provide extra energy to go out and take charge of your health and to really live a wonderful and healthy life. I'd first like to thank the Reserve Officers Association, and especially Colonel Cope, for helping to organize this event on a very short notice. And much kudos to you and your team. I'd like to thank General Vaught for introducing me in that very generous introduction. And to even just serve, to be on the podium with you is truly an honor. And I'd like to thank the Foundation for the Women in Military Service for the American Memorial Foundation. I've had the privilege to speak at Arlington Cemetery in that magnificent building on women's veterans issues, and I must say it's a real testament to the courage and the vision that you have demonstrated and led your troops over the years and women in the military today. So thank you very much for the introduction today.
Thank you.
To talk about stellar medicine is a very personal experience for me. I spent many hours on the iPad and on my computer trying to create a story, a narrative that would resonate with everyone, from my colleagues in medicine to the military that serve our nation to the patients that I take care of. Stellar Medicine, A Journey Through the Universe of Women's Health is a part memoir, part guidebook on controversial health issues. And I look at the political and social environment which shape our decisions, but I wanted the book to be nonpartisan. In fact, I launched it in a way that I think Republicans and Democrats could come together, and I think it is wonderful that we're right across from the Capitol, that I can actually say that, where we can all come together. But for every one of us in this room and across America, there's some basic things that we really appreciate. We want to have good health for ourselves and our family members. We want love in our lives. We want to live a life of wellness, and hopefully this book will help people capture it. It is a part memoir, so I go into very deeply personal stories, as well as stories about some of my patients. And it's a guidebook. It will give you the basic tools that you need to help navigate a life of wellness and health. Now, I think about my military connection. My father is a Holocaust survivor. He was in 4 concentration camps, liberated out of Buchenwald. He was born in Cluj, Romania. And when he came to the United States, he was so happy to be here, and he wanted to contribute back to his new nation, that he joined the Army. And because he's a linguist, speaks about 7 languages, he rose very quickly through the ranks and became a master sergeant. And what I love about his stories is that he would lead people in speaking in many different languages, but it was his basic love for this country. And when I go home back to Colorado, I still see his uniform in the closet. So being part of the military family started at a very early age. I talk about experiences that many of our military members have experienced, including PTSD and traumatic brain injury. And that wasn't just from a professional side where I would see patients with it, but also from a personal side, because I also have a family member who experienced that. And I think, as you mentioned, my mother having cancer, watching her go through that journey was extremely painful, but watching someone else that you love and care about dealing with PTSD and TBI was also painful. And I've written editorials in the Washington Post and tried to raise awareness about some of the issues that our troops experience, because often these injuries are invisible. But to the family members who deal with them day in and day out, they're not invisible. They're front and center. So hopefully this book helps to add a voice to that issue as well. Over the next few minutes, I want to just give you a little very quick journey about this book. I want to share with you the table of contents so you can hear about some of the issues that I'm dealing with, and some of them I hope will resonate with your lives or at least make you interested. As General Vaught mentioned, I've been all over the world. In fact, I've been to all of our 7 continents. I've climbed and hiked on all of them, including Antarctica, one of my most favorite places on the planet. And I tell people I wish I could adopt a penguin, but I think if I had one here today, he or she would not be very happy in Washington, D.C. But traveling the world has given me, I think, a perspective that I probably wouldn't have had just staying home. It's allowed me to go into different cultures, to experience them, and to hopefully be able to share some of those messages with you as well. I've also worked with the space program for over 15 years. I was an astronaut finalist, and I've had an opportunity as a medical advisor to NASA to understand how the body adapts in space. And some of you may be wondering, well, why is that even relevant to us here on Earth? And the basic answer is that space is an amazing platform for how we age. Now, all of us in this room are aging, and that's a good thing. What's really incredible about space is that we can slow down or even reverse some of the changes that happen to the body in space, and that certainly has relevance on Earth. And I'll share with you one of the chapters about why that is so important. Well, in the book, I have an introduction, and it's entitled, I Am Not Your Damn Intern. And I know that's a bit strident, but imagine that somebody would tell you that. And that was told to me the night that my mother was given a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. And I had the audacity to ask her physician questions. And I was asking them not so much as a physician, but as a concerned daughter. And that was told to me when I asked, I guess, one too many questions. And I remember thinking, I will remember that comment when I was told I'm not your damn intern, because we are everybody's interns. We are here to serve. And I thought it was very poignant to start the book with that, because hopefully this book will be used as a tool for you so that you can ask questions for your physicians and nurses so you can get the answers that you deserve. Chapter 1 I titled Pandemic of Misinformation. Do you remember when we were afraid of bird flu? Mm-hmm. In fact, some people stopped eating chicken. Mm-hmm. And then we went into the world of swine flu. We seem to love animals and our flus. And that frightened a lot of people. And now we're encountering a new virus called the MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome virus. So potentially in the fall that may be hitting our shores. I wrote this chapter, Pandemic and Misinformation, Truth or Consequences, is actually my last chapter in the book. I wrote it after I saw the Super Bowl, and I saw the American flag brought out. It was the flag from 9/11. I'm sure all of you have seen it one time or another on TV or perhaps in person. And I thought it would be a good chapter to start because it really describes how often when we're afraid, we often make very poor decisions. And one of my most basic tenements is when you are afraid, just stop. Stop for a moment, take a deep breath, think, and begin asking questions. And you can do that in almost every situation, including your health. So in this chapter, I talk about how we've encountered lots of different opportunities for fear and how that shaped our behavior. I also go into the last pandemic, which was the swine flu H1N1 pandemic, probably the first one of the century, and there will be others. But why it was important for all of us to get good information, to take charge of our health, and it was simple steps. Hand washing. Are you all now aware of hand washing? And perhaps getting that vaccine when the vaccine becomes available. So I think it's an important chapter because it really provides us the basic steps that we need to do to take charge of our health. Now, at the end of each chapter, I have something called stellar questions. And these are questions that are asked to me as I go around the country and actually around the world, because I've launched the book in England as well. Very good questions, and hopefully I provide some very basic answers. The joy of a book like this is I could write something today, and by tomorrow it may be outdated because we continually get new research and new studies coming in. But the questions don't change, and hopefully you will find that as you read the book. Chapter 2 is Hair Dye and the Killer Bra, Medical Myths and True Stories. I'm sure we have all been inundated with wonderful medical myths. How many of you have been told to eat chicken soup when you have a cold? I think almost all of us. Well, actually, there's some medicinal properties to that. Being raised in a Jewish family, I always had chicken soup around me, and I always thought, this was just propaganda to get me to eat it. But studies have proven that it can actually help your health, especially when you are ill. And I think the thing we have to remember with most medical myths is they're usually a kernel of truth in them. You just have to go down a little deeper to find that, and then to find what's fallacy and what's just been shed through the years by people telling tales, and they may not be the truth in them behind them. But I think you'll find the chapter interesting. Chapter 3 is Womb on the Moon, a galactic view of women's health. It's basically reproductive health. And there's some reasons why I titled it Womb on the Moon, which you will see when you read the chapter. But I think there's probably there is nothing more polarizing in women's health than reproductive health. And what I hope I did in this book is share both sides of the equation, to get people to understand each other, to talk to each other, not at each other, and to talk about how women's health is very important for reproductive health, and reproductive health is very important for women's health, as it is for men's health as well. Chapter 4 is global warming and more hot flashes, which I think all of us are probably experiencing today in this incredible heat. And it's about menopause. Now, that is a very confusing topic for most people. Again, one week you'll get some information that's going to refute the information from the week before. I've even gotten questions about whether men go through menopause, and perhaps in our Q&A period we'll be able to share that. But it's an interesting chapter because I think we have to look not only at conventional medication, hormone therapies that have been prescribed, but also traditional or alternative medications and modalities as well. I see menopause as a transition through life. It's not a disease state. It does not need to be medicalized. I go into some of the reasons why that has happened. But hopefully when you finish reading the chapter, you'll come out of it with questions for yourself, for your family members, and for your loved ones, so that you have a greater understanding of what menopause is actually about, the transition period. I also talk about Chapter 5, Cosmic Cosmetology, which is one of my favorite chapters, and it's on sex and gender-based medicine. Now, some of you may be wondering what I'm talking about when I say that. I use the term sex as defined by the Institute of Medicine, how men and women are different or similar at the most basic chromosomal level. When I talk about gender, I'm talking about how we are different at a psychosocial construct, how society sees you. Now, let me ask you a question. How many of you think men and women think differently? Raise your hand.
Thinks differently?
Okay. In that regard, we almost all agree on that concept. And it's true. Our brains are wired differently. It's really an interesting phenomenon. I've had the joy to be working with NASA to study this. In fact, about 2 weeks ago, we had a virtual workshop where we looked at every single system in the body to see how it adapts to space from a sex-gender perspective. And again, do you remember I mentioned to you that space is an amazing platform because the body changes very quickly. So you're able to discern these differences very quickly as well as very clearly. And it's in every single system of the body. So for example, I mentioned the brain. Women have something called a very active corpus callosum. It's a highway. It's that neural highway between the right and left hemispheres. In women, it's extremely active. In men, it's active too, but not as much. So what we see is that, for example, if a woman has a stroke, especially a younger woman, she may regain the use of her speech faster, more efficiently. We saw that, unfortunately, with the shooting with Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, and she was shot in the left hemisphere. Her right side has begun to pick up some of the speech capability. The brain is amazing because it does rewire, but there are distinct changes we see as we age, and we see, for example, with Alzheimer's, more women are inclined to develop Alzheimer's, and it may be because women tend to live longer, but there may also be something at a more basic biological mechanism. Now, for the space program, we're dealing with something very interesting. It's called visual impairment intracranial pressure, VIP. What we are seeing in some of our astronauts going into space is that there's increased pressure in the brain, which is causing visual impairment. But what is really fascinating is we tend to only see it in our male astronauts. What is the reason for that? Is it hormonal? Is it that men and women deal with radiation and toxin exposure differently, or the flow of blood from their feet to their head differently? This is a very important issue that we have to solve before we really can do safely long-duration travel, for example, back to the moon or asteroids or to Mars. That's just one example. Another one I just want to share with you because it's an important disease state. Have you all heard about osteoporosis? It's a state where your bones become thin and they're at risk for fracturing, even to very mild trauma. And it's also where the architecture of the bone changes, which make you more susceptible to fracturing with very mild trauma, such as rolling over in bed or picking up a heavy bag. What's fascinating is that 80% of those afflicted on Earth are women. And what's even more interesting is that when a man does develop osteoporosis and he fractures, he's more likely to die within the first year compared to a woman. I asked the men in this room, how many of you have ever had a physician ask you about your calcium intake, or about your resistance exercise, or about your bone health? Probably none. So in a sense, we have this gender bias, but it's an important issue. And we certainly see it in our military populations. We see increased fractures, stress fractures, and we're seeing it not just in younger women, but we're also seeing it in older men as well. So it's an important issue and one that I really urge everyone to take charge of. Chapter 6, which we're going to come back to, is A Nation of Ghosts, and it's the indivisible injuries of war, and that is where I really do talk about veterans' health issues, not just from a professional side, but also from a deeply personal one, and I will go through that chapter with you in a little more detail. Chapter 7, as mentioned, is entitled Sex, Chocolate, Wine, and Shopping, Health Benefits to Life's Pleasures. I am sure almost all of us love chocolate, and people say, well, I love to shop, but isn't that bad for you? And I say it's actually great for you. In fact, I recommend it most days of the week. Just a few minutes. and I know men shop too. I've been in the hardware stores and tech stores, so it's actually quite good for you, and it's an equal opportunity activity. When I talk about life's pleasures, some of these activities have been demonized. And part of it is it's moderation. Often we don't know when to stop. Now, if one has a problem with addiction to any of it, you can't even begin. But life is designed for pleasure, and so a piece of dark chocolate is great for you. I did have a patient once who came in and said, well, you said chocolate was very good, so I ate the entire tub of chocolate ice cream. Let's talk about calories and fat content. It can just even be a simple piece of dark chocolate, and there are health benefits. It's natural serotonin, a natural antidepressant. It can actually even lower blood pressure. But again, moderation. And we can talk a little later about the benefits of alcohol as well. It's funny, you know, men and women metabolize alcohol differently. For one drink for a woman could be equivalent to 2 drinks for a man. But when we talk about moderation, the benefits are there. And in fact, drug companies are looking at what are the special ingredients in wine, for example, that we can market to the population. So I think there is some value in understanding how your body metabolizes alcohol, and then if you are drinking it, toast to your health. I think that's always a good thing. When I talk about sex, I'm talking about human contact, intimacy. We've seen, for example, babies that have not been held in orphanages. They often do not do well. In fact, they may not even survive. We know human touch is so important. We were just talking recently about the world we live in. It's a virtual world. We communicate with each other electronically. In fact, we rarely even hear each other's voices. And I think that's changing the way our brains are adapting. I think it changes the way that we communicate. I think it even affects us in regard to our own health. We know, for example, that when women are together, the hormone levels of women change. Cortisol levels, that stress hormone, goes down. Oxytocin, what we call the love hormone, actually increases. Natural endorphins or natural opiates or painkillers actually rise. So we feel better. Even just being in this room together right now is a very good thing. And I think we need to really regain that focus of people connecting with each other. Chapter 8 is another personal chapter, and it's called The Stardust Connection, Spirituality, Faith, and Healing. There was a study that asked doctors of whether they believed in miracles, and over 70% of them said they did. What's interesting for me as I wrote this chapter is I had to tap deep into my own personal experiences navigating my mom's journey with pancreatic cancer, and also my life experiences as a physician taking care of patients. And I truly believe that there are no coincidences. I also truly believe that we're all connected, that we're all made of exquisite stardust from the beginning of time, and it's that energy that flows between us that really keeps us healthy and well, and I thought that was important to have in there. What's been very interesting for me as I share that chapter in medical schools around the country, often senior physicians will come up to me, and some of them with tears in their eyes, saying that they have not really had a chance to reconnect to that part of themselves. It's almost as if when you go into medical school, it's taken away so we can focus on chemistry, and we can focus on pathology, and we can focus on the disease state, and not the state of healing and the state of what makes us human. And I think it's important that we reconnect to that, because that is the major ingredient of wellness and living a life filled with pleasure and joy. The last chapter is on blogs of advice. I remember writing my first blog back in 2008, and I was so excited when I sent it out to the world and I started getting responses back. So even though I say that we need to communicate with each other in person, it's still a wonderful tool that we can be able to share messages with each other and have that kind of feedback. I also found that as I was going through some difficult journeys with my loved one in the military as well as with my family members through illness, being able to write a blog was so valuable because it helped heal me as well and helped me to link out to the world when I couldn't be there in presence. So for just a few minutes, I want to share with you Chapter 6, A Nation of Ghosts. Some people have asked me, why do you use the word loved one? Why don't you just state who the family member is? And there are a couple of reasons for that. My loved one served in Afghanistan, sustained injuries. And I think it really almost in a way doesn't matter whether it's a father or a mother or a sister or brother, a wife or a husband or a child. It's somebody you care about. And it's also a way to protect privacy and confidentiality. The other part of it is with these illnesses and this type of injury to the brain, there's often a lack of self-awareness. So sometimes you don't even know you're experiencing these issues. And unless you can almost own these experiences, it's very difficult to treat them. So I want to respect that level as well. I know many of you have had friends and family members who've experienced it. Perhaps somebody in your family has had Alzheimer's or forms of dementia, or have had sports accidents where there's been concussions. I think when you look into the eyes of your loved one and you see just your reflection back, you know that something serious has happened. And I think for me, as I was navigating this during the years right after 9/11, and not finding the medical care that I needed, but I knew deep down something was wrong, it inspired me to want to be a voice for those who could not speak about it, whether they were the patient or a family member. I've been able to testify up on Capitol Hill, to write editorials, to talk to clinicians and individuals who treat our family members, to hopefully add a level of awareness. And I'll go through a little bit about that in the book. I talk about the first part about hard blows. Have any of you ever hit your head? Yeah. Probably all of us. And some of us have probably had some hard knocks, whether you've been in a sporting accident or you fell down. But imagine you've been in war and you're wearing your helmet and your body armor and you've had a blast go by you, or you've been knocked to the ground by an IED. What we have seen with traumatic brain injury, and some people call this the signature injuries of our war, is that they can often be invisible. We see people walking the streets and we can know sometimes that they've had an injury because they have a plate in their head or they've had a bandage. But often these injuries from these type of wars that we've been fighting are invisible. We can't see them. Now the challenge as a physician is that we can't even sometimes visualize them on a CAT scan or an MRI device. We are developing better devices called functional MRIs, and the Navy, for example, is doing a remarkable job. The University of Pittsburgh has done a very good job to really try to get down almost at an axonal level, a very small level, to see injury. The challenge is that we don't have that perfect test, and not only don't we have that perfect test to image it, we don't have that perfect test to test it. And it can be, we know that there's cognitive awareness changes, we know there may be memory deficits, we know that there may be personality changes. The difficulty is catching it early. There are many studies now. The VA and DoD are doing some remarkable work to look in the field so that when there has been an injury or an accident or an explosion, that there be immediate testing to the best of their knowledge, that people who've been unconscious be removed from the battlefield, that there be care provided. It's taken us many years to get to this point. And I think the challenge that we have is that there are a lot of people out there that are probably not being diagnosed. What we have seen with concussions, for example, with our football players and our athletes, is that they may suffer a hard blow today, but it may be years later that they may be developing dementia or Alzheimer's, which will have a connection. And we are seeing that link. So it's not just treating the cognitive impairment that's occurring right now today, but trying to prevent injury and illness downstream. And this is a big, big challenge. Another challenge to compound it is post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, it was mentioned about the airplane crash, a very traumatic event. Probably almost all of us have experienced some type of trauma. Some of us will experience what we call post-traumatic stress disorder, which can be characterized by flashbacks and hallucinations and increased anxiety and feeling like you're reliving the event. But some of you may not have them for years and years, so you don't even connect the event that actually caused the injury. And that's been a challenge. Often traumatic brain injury and PTSD can go hand in hand. They can look very similar to each other, but can require different types of treatment. And I think the military has done a better job helping to diagnose individuals and our troops who've been hurt in the field so that we can begin treating not only in the battlefield, but also as soon as individuals come home. I've advocated that we do testing before someone deploys, while someone is on deployment, and afterwards for at least 2 years. But as I began to think about PTSD, I really began to think about it in a slightly different perspective. They call it shock and awe. Now, all of us are familiar with the term shock and awe after we had the bombing of Baghdad. That phrase was introduced into our lexicon. I tend to think of awe right now as adaptation to the war environment. The body, just as I mentioned to you earlier, the body adapts to any environment it is in, and it has to adapt to the war environment as well. The increased arousal may be an adaptive form to handle what is around you. The increased sensitivity, the increased heightened awareness. But as we migrate down the path to having it cause disability, that's when, in my mind, it becomes PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, let me give you an analogy. We know our astronauts, for example, will change, their bodies will change when they go into space. It will adapt. What we do is we get our astronauts in the best shape possible before they go. In space, we have something called countermeasures to try to slow down or reverse some of those changes. So, for example, I mentioned to you osteoporosis. As we are sitting here in this room, we're all losing about 1% of our bone mass per year. But in space, it can be anywhere from 1 to 5% per month. But we have countermeasures that we enact in space to slow down that process. They can be nutritional, they can be physical activity, they may be medicinal. And we also, when we bring back our astronauts from their missions, we have extensive rehabilitation. Everybody's program is individualized, tailored to what they need. And it's just accepted that the body is adapted. It's not a form of weakness, it's actually a natural state of being. Now imagine if we could rephrase PTSD into something called awe, adaptation to the war environment, where it's actually natural and normal for the body and mind to adapt to this environment. And we know that it's going to happen, everybody in their own particular way. But coming back, it's just a natural process. And it's not a badge of not being strong enough or having the right stuff or being inept. It's just your body's adapted. So it becomes a badge of courage, actually, to say that you've experienced awe. I think it's reframing the equation. And I hope over time that we can do that. As we talk about PTSD, we know people feel more comfortable to share it, but not everyone, especially those who are in the junior ranks, because they're afraid it's going to hurt their career. So this is something that I think the dialogue needs to begin, and we can really move forward when we look at it from a slightly different perspective. For a few minutes, I want to talk about the female warrior. It's an interesting time. Women have been on the front lines for years and years and years. Finally, this year, we are having a new policy implemented where women will be in combat on the front line, have it acknowledged. And I think this is extremely important. I think when we talk about the female warrior, and I know we have several in this room, I would love to get your stories. There are many, many issues. Some of the rates of homelessness are highest among our female warriors, women returning back from battle. We also know that we've been dealing with something that's been very nefarious and very malignant, and that is the issues of sexual trauma and harassment. I think what was interesting for me a few months ago was when some of the new reports came out that confirmed what we were seeing. When you go back in time, we've had reports that have shown anywhere from 25 to 30% of women have commented that they've been sexually assaulted or harassed. And there have been many programs that have been put into place, but I think as we've seen, we need to do a better job, and we need to provide an environment where you feel safe among your comrades. I think some of the challenges have been this sort of closed environment and people needing to come out so that they can get the help that they need into the environments where they can be protected, both for men and for women as well. And hopefully through our Q&A period, we can talk a little bit more about that. For one moment, I just want to read to you a page from the end of that chapter. And again, I think it's something that may resonate with some of you in this room, but if you think about it, the war has been carried on the backs of less than 1% of the population. Less than 1%. And we've been at war for a very, very long time. As the wars are dying down, as they're coming to an end, our troops are coming back home. And the injuries that they've encountered and experienced at war will be on our shores. And it's not only that, it's the children who've experienced the isolation and not having their parents around or watching them suffer as they've come back with different injuries. We have a new generation that we need to take care of. And I really hope that it's something that we as a nation come together, because We saw what happened after Vietnam, and we need to now honor the troops that are coming back, and I hope this book and the discussions we'll have will do that. So from the chapter, A Nation of Ghosts. For so many with loved ones in the military, the years since September 11, 2001 have been a series of time together, trying to reciprocate and recapture the promise of marriages, the joys of caring for children, the bliss of simple gifts such as taking a walk and vast time apart when our fears are magnified by news reports of bombings and death. The public can understand that finality, but there is another side to this war that is finally being exposed, the psychological and traumatic impairment which can be hard to measure and visualize. It's been stated that cognitive brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder are the signature injuries of these conflicts. Even when our loved ones return, some with physical injuries as well, it is these invisible wounds that damage the fabric of lives. They may come home, but emotionally they have disappeared. Military families across the country can share tales how loved ones cannot sit in crowded rooms or outdoors for fear of an explosive device being detonated. How the nights are filled with terror as images shatter dreams. Perhaps these are normal reactions to abnormal situations. Yet these reactions create chaos in the world back home, which is not bombarded with enemy fire or bombs. On September 5th, 2008, the Army stated that the suicide rate among returning veterans was higher than the general population and even among Vietnam warriors, and these casualties continue to climb. Shocking numbers which should have alarmed the American public and created a public outcry. But there were no outcries, not even a whimper. The years of planning and leading missions, evading or stalking an enemy, always being on guard, have taken a massive toll on our loved ones' psyches and their health as well as their families. Then to navigate healthcare systems that don't acknowledge these injuries for concern over disability payments or ineptitude only compound a tragic situation. I recall speaking to one vet center health provider who told me that their goal was to keep our troops off the streets and out of jail, lofty goals for our citizens who defended our nation. We must stop viewing the treatment of invisible injuries as a luxury. It is a necessity to ensure that our troops, our loved ones, can defend our nation and come back and be productive members of our society and our families. It has taken a nation of ghosts, individuals coming back from wars with their spirits and bodies broken to finally achieve this call to arms. So thank you so much, and we now have time for some questions. Any questions?
I just have a question. Tim Green, I work at the Department of Labor. I don't know if you need a microphone.
You didn't address exercise in your health book. Was that by design, or do you?
I actually do address exercise.
Okay.
Yes.
I didn't hear it.
Yes. And it's funny because I use the analogy of shopping, and let me just talk to you about shopping for a minute to explain why it's exercise, but also to talk about the health benefits of exercise in general. When you shop, you move quickly if there's a sale, so you have aerobic conditioning. Hopefully you buy a lot of things, so you have weight-bearing activities, so it's great for your muscles and bones. And then if you're doing it as a group, you have all those hormonal benefits of being in a group activity. So a very simple activity such as shopping can be very good for you. I do talk about physical activity. In fact, I think it's hand in glove. I often have had people come up to me and say, you know, I'm watching my weight, I'm eating this, this, and this, but I still keep gaining weight. And I ask about their physical activity, their lifestyle, and they don't walk. They don't take the stairs. They're looking for the closest parking spot. When I talk about physical activity, I'm not telling you have to go to the gym, although I think sometimes the gym is a great place because there is a community there. And you have trainers there who can help guide you, especially if you haven't been exercising for a while. But I actually look at the entire world as our giant playground. Even though it was 200 degrees outside coming over here, I was actually happy to walk. And in fact, I was just in New York on Friday with a suitcase. I walked everywhere. It was my weight resistance moving my suitcase, but it was also to be outside, to move. And it really is simple. I'm so concerned about our generation of children who are growing up with very strong thumbs because they know how to use their smart devices, they know how to type on their computer, they're interacting with videos that are really wonderfully virtual, so they think they're out there exercising. They're not. In fact, I remember one story in the Washington Post. It was after one of our ominous storms and we lost our electricity and people didn't have their computer, and they were saying children didn't know what to do. They had never gone outside to play in their backyard, for example. So it's just simple things. Every day, become conscious of it. I had a flood in my house, and I changed my mindset to think, great, now I get to lift boxes. It changed my mindset. What became something that would have been an onerous chore became a great thing. I now was doing something good for my body. So it is really important. Just become conscious of it. It's about 30 minutes every day. It doesn't have to be all at the same time. It could be a few minutes here, a few minutes there. Highly recommend most days of the week. It's simple things like taking the stairs, like walking. Like, I love the winter because I love to shovel when it snows. I think, isn't this amazing? I get exercise today. I garden, go outside and pick up those branches and pulling weeds.
What do you think about the mosquitoes?
Well, it's interesting. Thank you for asking that. I figured that one out too. Not only the spray, but I had been in the Amazon and I had one of these nets that you wear over your face. And when I go out there, I wear my baseball cap because you need sun protection. A little bit of sun's good for you. 15 minutes a day will give you your vitamin D. But I wear a cap, and then I have this little screen. I look like a beekeeper. And everyone walks by, and I always get asked about it. And then I always get told that it's a brilliant idea. So it keeps the mosquitoes away from me. But again, most mosquitoes will not kill you. I have several bites to attest to it. It's just being active. And we also see with older individuals, for example, those who are older and they're active and they like dancing, they almost decrease rates of dementia in some of these populations. So we know moving is a wonderful thing. The First Lady's program to move is really beneficial. It's not just nutrition, it's got to be exercise. So I hope that answers your question.
Perfect, yeah, exactly.
And space, hours a day,
Yeah.
they are exercising to try to maintain bone mass.
What inspired you to write the book?
It's an interesting question. I was doing a TV interview in Chicago for one of those afternoon TV shows. And I was working at Health and Human Services at the time. And the producer came up and said, why don't you write a book? And I had never thought about it. First, the thought of writing a book just seemed so overwhelming that I just registered it and put it in the back of my mind. And I noticed that I started writing things on stickies. Have you seen those little yellow stickies? You look at my purse, it's filled with it. And I found that as I started experiencing life around me, whether it was my travels or interactions with people, I would write notes. And I realized I had interesting material here for a book. So when I retired from government in 2006, it was a wonderful time to sit down and write. The other part for me, as I was going through the experiences with my family member coming back from war and dealing with my mom's illnesses, just all the trials and tribulations, being able to write was very cathartic. I think all of you in this room are writers. We write every day now with our emails, and it's just being able to be patient enough. Near the end, I would write 19 hours a day, and it would help to have those blizzards where you couldn't go out at times except to shovel, to write. And for me, it's a gift to be able to share it with everybody. I have a second book that is in my mind right now called Space Aging, A Manual for Stellar Health, and it will talk about how we can even slow down and reverse a lot of the changes that we see in the body as we age, and how we can use space as a wonderful model for that. Yes.
I have one comment. A couple of weeks ago, I had a great opportunity to listen to a woman astronaut speak about, she called it lose it or lose it, use it or lose it. And she talked about her muscles and how hard it was. And even she had to kind of retrain herself to turn a corner. So I loved your comments about that. Thank you. Secondly, I'd like to ask you what you think about alternative medicines like acupuncture and things of that sort.
Great questions. First of all, what she's talking about is neuronal plasticity. The brain rewires, and it adapts to the situation at hand. So, for example, when our astronauts are sick in space the first few days because their eyes are sensing one thing and their ears are sensing that they're falling back to Earth, over a few days the brain rewires. But then when she comes back, she has to rewire to gravity. And it takes a little bit of time to do that. So she had to be very conscious of how she moved her head and how she turned. It's really magnificent. The brain rewires. And that's why as we experience PTSD and TBI, we can use the tools of our brain to help us to rewire, maybe overcome some of those short circuits that are there. Now, in regard to alternative therapy, it's really interesting. My father's Hungarian. And on Friday nights, he would always have a little bottle of red wine for us, and everything had garlic in it. And he said it was good for your health, and we thought he was doing it because he just didn't want us to date. It was effective. But then the studies started to come out to tell us the health benefits within garlic for our blood vessels and also with wine as well. So that was my simple introduction to what we called hocus pocus medicine. When I came to the Department of Health and Human Services, I was fortunate to launch with several of my colleagues a study on conventional complementary alternative menopausal practices. It was called CAMPS. Everything in government has an acronym. And we were looking at simple activities such as breathing exercises and meditation. And I go through several of these modalities in the book because I am a proponent. The NIH, for example, has done some very interesting studies on acupuncture and has found benefit. The challenge we have is that we often use Eastern modalities to study Western therapies, and there can be a slight disconnect. The National Centers for Alternative Medicine, NCAM, was launched many years ago, and they are doing a really good job to try to understand how some of these therapies work. Now, with that caveat, I believe in safety. Because something is natural, for example, doesn't necessarily mean it's safe for you. So, for example, I grow foxglove digitalis in my backyard. I do not want to eat it. It has properties that could impact my heart. I find it always interesting when I go into health food stores that there may be someone behind the counter and someone will tell them their entire medical history, but I can't get that history when they come to my office. Very interesting to me. It is important for all of you that if you use something from the health food store or you buy online, bring it with you to your doctor because there can be interactions with medications you may be taking or with different therapies that may be administered to you. So let me give you an example. St. John's wort. You can grow it. You can make it brewed in a tea. You can go to the health food store and take it in a pill. There are some studies that have shown it may have benefit to reduce the severity of mild depression. But most people don't know that it can interact with other drugs, such as birth control pills and even chemotherapy. So it is really important that you let everyone on your medical team know what you're doing. I believe in meditation. There are wonderful studies now that actually can show the brain lighting up to show how it's being impacted. It can lower blood pressure, it can help with insulin and control for diabetes. So I think we're weaving it. We often call it alternative until it becomes accepted, and then it becomes conventional. But just bear in mind that you need to really read as much as you can, share the information with your health team, and that what might work for you may not work for you. We're all different, and that brings me into the world of personalized medicine. Remember I talked about sex and gender-based medicine? How men and women are similar and different? That's going to be the cornerstone for a lot of what we're doing in personalized medicine. We're beginning to tailor care individually to each of us so that we minimize the side effects and get the maximum gain. And alternative, quote-unquote, alternative medicine has to be part of that as well because we know we all respond differently to different things. Great question. Questions on this one?
I want to take that a step further. I was going to ask about alternative medicine as well, and it's not just taking herbs or pills and things like this, but even nutrition.
Right.
Doctors don't talk about nutrition at all. And the older I get, the more I'm reading now all these magazines and brochures about nutrition and how that affects you. I had a doctor last year who was wonderful, who talked to me about these things, and then he was fired from the practice. He's gone now. And so I have a new doctor who I saw earlier this year, and I asked him about that. I said, the doctor told me about this, that, and the other. I don't know anything about that.
And I would say find a new doctor if you can, if
It's
it's possible.
frustrating.
It's nutrition. We're coming now full circle because we talked about physical activity. Nutrition, so very, very important. I have just joined to be medical co-lead for Inspiration Mars. Are you familiar with that new project? Mm-hmm. That is to send a couple to orbit the planet Mars in 2018. You have to be over the age of 50, and you have to be able to handle your partner in a very small vehicle without killing him. So that is a basic caveat, but it's very exciting. Now the challenge we have is we're beginning to look at some of the medical issues, is that radiation is a significant issue. It's an issue for us on Earth, but we're protected by an atmosphere. In space, you don't have that protection. So you have solar radiation, you have galactic cosmic radiation, and there isn't a lot you can do. You can develop better shielding for solar, but for galactic cosmic, it's challenging. So we're going to look at personalized medicine. Remember, I just mentioned that before. We're going to look at how you are similar and different to someone else at a genomic level, so we can kind of risk profile. But we're also going to look at something called nutraceuticals. Are there elements in nutrition that we can use that can help shield us from some of the radiation? So that's a very extreme example, but it's very important. Nutrition is so important for our bone health. I remember when I was growing up drinking Tab. Do you remember that? It wasn't even Coca-Cola, it was Tab. And what was fascinating is my mom always said to me, you need to start drinking more milk. You need to think about your bones. And it was an omen because she actually sustained significant osteoporotic fractures later on. So my risk is there because I have inherited probably that tendency with my mom having it. And now I'm very aware of what I'm eating. Now the good thing is you can get calcium in many wonderful food products and vitamin D. We all love yogurt, frozen yogurt, ice cream. Some of you may love herring with eating the bones. Not exactly my favorite, but very high in calcium. But you can look at the back label to see what foods contain what, and I really think it's balanced. The other thing that might be worthwhile for you, another activity, is to engage a nutritionist who can sit down and look at your diet and really plot out and help guide you so that there is balance. And I think those are very important steps you can take as well. Now with that said, I'm not recommending you go to a health food store and buy every vitamin under the sun. In fact, you'll have very expensive urine usually. But some of them in high levels can be toxic. Vitamin A can do that for you, and even vitamin E. And we have to be aware of that. Even fish oil, there were some new studies coming out that men may be at a higher risk for prostate cancer if they're consuming high amounts of fish oil. So this is something, the omega-3s. So it's a balancing act. Very important.
Well, that's why you'd like to have your doctor know these things too, and not have to read the magazine.
And I remember when I was in medical school, we actually went on protest. We picketed because we wanted a course on nutrition. Who would have thought a doctor wanting a course in nutrition? So this is very important. When you speak with your nurse or your doctor, find out what their interest is. And then if they're not able to, they can certainly refer you to someone. Very important. Yes. You have a question first. Yes.
You had mentioned launching internationally or going to England. So what were some of the issues that came up there as compared to here? I mean, were there some of their issues different, and what was kind of the comparison in terms of?
One of the most memorable moments I had was to actually do a veterans event up in Durham, England, and I had veterans back from World War II all the way through each of the wars. And it was really poignant because we were sitting around a very large table. It was in the city council room. And everyone began to share their tales and their stories. And even though decades separated individuals, they came together as a unit. And it was that shared camaraderie, those through the core, that truly resonated. And what I also saw resonate is even though our cultures are very different, there's different ways we look at things, there was that shared experience. And I found that to be extremely valuable. I launched the book in England, because it's when the book came out. It actually initially came out as an e-book when I was in India, and that's another experience I'd love to share with you. But it came out in hard copy when I was in England. And I launched it at a geriatric community center, and this was actually with women who were wives and widows of veterans. And for many of them, it was their first time to be able to share their experiences. They were a little more reticent to talk about, for example, menopause, or talk about some of the more personal issues. But I found as we were in one group together, everybody began chatting. So again, that human connection really bypassed any cultural difficulty at all. It was fascinating.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with regard to your book today. With your background, what one or two health policy issues do you think are most important to us? And what can we do to facilitate having something be done with them?
For the military environment or for the general population?
Either or.
Either or. Okay. Well, I think just for the military population, and Colonel Cope, you can help me with this because I know you've been involved with some legislation. As women are coming more onto the front line, some of the issues, the health issues, need to be looked at from that perspective as well. So there's acknowledgement and that there's care as well as the benefits that are provided. I think from my perspective and working within the public health service, the issue of prevention is so important. And I know that there's a lot of debate and discussion about quote-unquote Obamacare and our healthcare system. What has begun to happen, though, is it's refocused some of the discussion on prevention and having preventive screening provided. A lot of patients would not come in and get their tests done because they couldn't afford it. And now to have that. But not only that, once they are diagnosed, if they do get diagnosed with something, that there is appropriate care to provide that pathway. So I think that is extremely important. And then the other important element is mental health care. It's always fascinating to me, the brain is connected to the rest of the body, and yet we dissect it. And we have it as two separate categories. And as I talked about in my presentation earlier, TBI and PTSD may go hand in glove, may not be able to discern which is which. Is it really that important at that moment? So I think improved coverage is extremely important. Understanding the pathways why these illnesses develop so that we might have better therapy, but also the psychosocial support structure is extremely, extremely important. It's important for our veterans community, it's important for military family members, and it's important for the general population. We live in a 24/7 day. We're being bombarded. Stress levels are very high. We're not taking the time to exercise and do what we need to do. All that compounds it. So we need to find a way as a society to be able to help each other. And I think looking at mental health as part of overall health is extremely important.
We have time for maybe one more question?
One more question?
Before the book signing.
Yes.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'm Hiroki Kono from Japan, and I'm a psychiatrist and have been studying anti-medicine. I'd like to ask you about PTSD. I know some psychotherapy such as cognitive behavior therapy, EMDR, prolonged exposure. What is the best way or better way to treat PTSD?
Oh, and then it's always nice to end a session on one of the most difficult questions that groups all over the country are examining and looking at. I do talk about the therapies that you have mentioned, and they're very important and they have significant benefit. Just as a quick sidetrack, we know men and women may experience PTSD slightly differently. For example, we see women tend to befriend and men tend to fight or flight. Our brains are wired differently to respond to stress hormones. There may be higher rates of PTSD within the female population because of that. There are new centers that are being built within the VA system and within the DoD, which will hopefully answer some of those issues. Some of the interesting studies that were published about a year or two ago stated that when you have the incident right in the field, that you begin to treat it. There was one study looking at the use of morphine, for example. It was something, a pain suppressant that sort of short-circuited that pathway so that the brain doesn't get rewired to experience that event over and over again. I think looking at it from really a basic biochemical approach is going to be very valuable. While that research is underway, I still think we need to think about cognitive behavioral therapy and to provide our troops and anyone who's experienced it the tools that they need to be able to adjust to their life around them. But not only that, it's not just the patient, it's everyone around them as well. As our troops are coming home, they're reintegrating into society. They're coming back into the workplace. And I had one individual tell me he was brilliant at his job. He was brought into an environment where it's a high stress environment. It was a center to detect biochemical changes in the environment. It was just constant noise, and his supervisor was not aware of some of the issues he was encountering. So for example, not having his back to the door and maybe dampening some of the noise in that room, because it was very difficult to really just adapt to that environment and not relive what he had experienced. So I think it's also important to get society to be attuned to some of these issues. It's not just the individual, it's society and it's the family. We need to treat us as one community, and that perhaps will be the biggest change. And on that note, I wish you all stellar health, and I hope you have stellar medicine. Thank you very much.
Dr. Mark will be having book signing in just one second, but it's traditional here at ROA and in the military that we give a coin to those people who have made a great program possible. So I'm actually going to give 3 coins today. Obviously one to our great guest speaker, Dr. Mark. Dr. Mark, thank you so much for a spectacular talk. I'd also like to give one to our marvelous person, General Vaughn, who introduced our speaker. Who brought Dr. Mark to us today. To the front to engage in the book signing.
Wires here.
Or do you just want to take it? Because I'm just going to give you. Thank you. This is a wonderful presentation. Good question.
How would you like me to?
Thank you. Cecil Beaton. He was the greatest producer, director of American cinema.
Oh, thank you.
Nice to be with us.
Oh, yeah.
Appreciate you coming.
Thank you for having
And I can wait till we're done.
Oh, military. I'm just
Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Terrific. Actually, I'm Ken Federal for Services Based Veteran and very much involved.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
And she had been up for about 40 hours. And she heard about this.
Get some pictures.
Very much. And there are several different organizations.
in terms of getting it.
She's got some very interesting little stories on
Well,
this.
I was in the Navy.
And so I'm going to get it. I'm going to read the parts I'm interested in.
And met the group with that.
Is Marilla still with me?
That is Marilla up there. Especially sitting by the.
It's good to see you.
Oh, really?
The other day.
Thank you so much.
Did you see this man here?
Dr. Mark.
And we all need to.
That is so funny. It's amazing. It's good to see you.
Cards. People have something in there or something like that. Oh, very good. Just trying to make
Such a treat to see you. How are you?
Is that okay?
Great. So,
Yeah, I'm gonna run.
and one is for you, and both of them are for you? One, are you gonna, is one of these for her or both of these? Okay, so we'll put yours in here, and
Third child coming, third grandchild.
third grandchild. Thank you so much.
And so I
How
started
long are you
flipping
both
through
here for?
the book.
Are you here for the summer or for summertime?
I thought, well,
CHE or
talk about it.
Yeah, okay, super. Do you have it, is there
Uh-huh.
any sign that reads that?
Well, I'm gonna get a book.
Oh, good.
What happened to me? I was over at, what am I supposed to do?
Did you want something special signed on it, or she'll just sign it if it's for you?
So there's my notes.
Okay, well, it's well. It was super.
Actually, I'm space medicine.
Where are you, well, you have an accent, Japanese space agency. And they are a major partner.
Yeah,
This is a great space station.
yeah.
Today we didn't get it.
I told Merle about it.
You were down at
Yeah,
Space
I
Center.
was-
So agree to come into the work.
So are you doing an elective here?
Right. I don't know who's, but I can check and see who's.
She said, you didn't tell me they had a partner place.
Yeah, well, you know, a free agent, and it's parking too.
Moderation, of course. I mean, which ones are you visiting?
NYA
I thought Henry.
specialist for adrenal
Her mother is here.
Oh, okay.
She just came in last Thursday.
Monica. You're gonna have a show this year?
I
Well, I
thought
hope you find it productive. Thank you so much.
Just wanted to say that.
It gives you so much to do. You see it? Sorry. You could tell. Oh my gosh.
That's what I intended. One of the things I forgot to mention was the fact that you had been in London, the doctor and the obstetrics. When is the big baby going to be born?
Yeah, that's a big question. Probably next week.
Next week.
I would say next week. And if I knew the answer to that, I was
You
going
would
to
be,
bet on the
you
lottery.
would be over there betting.
Yes. So exciting though to have public engaged in good traditions. It's really remarkable. But you know, I have to say that the science have been very involved. It wasn't that And I really give them credit.
I'll tell you, Prince Harry certainly made a lot of friends in his last visit here. And it was impressive to see him on TV. He was with
Sometime when we're having.
that Olympics type thing that they were, he was down there with them.
And she was. I really.
I want to say hello properly.
Oh, you hang up too.
Are you?
We're not allowed to go out now.
She didn't just get the proper way to do it.
I mean, we have 8 years.
I only have 5 here.
Well, what years?
You don't have any people.
Mine too.
You might too.
Well, I would consider it.
Yeah.
but I'm certainly will.
Much I know. Thank you very much, sir.
And you want you to tell Dr. Mark what you'd like her to inscribe in yours, and then I'll tell her what I'll have inscribed in yours. We'll look at these habits so that we'll, you can write, tell me if I put your name down.
Despite the weird craziness that we, I don't know, made her endure.
It's not enough to mention it if you want to say anything, and then she'll read that as well. It's about military things. I would carry it.
Something like that. So I signed a spell. I heard her when she was a student. It was up at college.
It wasn't in
No, there was something up there.
As I looked and I saw a report about Dawn Huffaker, or Huffaker, whom we know. I was.
But so we did fun stuff like that. Merle and I went to her.
Oh, good. Major Jennifer Snyder getting the first woman to be awarded the Silver Star for
So
her
she works in
involvement in a battle, because who they've been telling is the first one.
Fridays, I guess.
Is not her. It's
Whatever they are. But once she finished school, she said she was.
So I got to show this to Merlin. She says, "Who is she?"
She
I even signed for that. Like 11 involuntary.
Yeah. So she said she wants to come back for the holidays and work for no money again. Okay. She got But she said you'll like her a lot. She's very fun. And let's see, who else? Well, Therese is our only new person. We haven't had any other hires. I'm trying to think of who's left. Well, Merle's assistant, you remember her?
Right.
Linda's still there.
Yes.
But Merle's assistant left.